Hey everyone, Clio here, welcome to my channel, and today I will be bridging the gap between YA fantasy and adult fantasy. Today I'm going into some books. I'm going to be talking about 5 series that I feel really hit that sort of sweet spot between the two. They might lean more towards one than towards the other, but I definitely feel like if you are looking to expand your experiences in adult literature, that these series could definitely work for you. So the first one that I'm going to give is a stereotypical recommendation. A lot of people will recommend this to YA readers looking to go into adult, and that would be Brandon Sanderson. Now I do caution you to be wary of which books you choose to start with for Brandon Sanderson, because there's a lot of hype at the moment for his new series, the Stormlight Archive, but Stormlight Archive I definitely don't recommend as a step into adults. Definitely if you have had difficulties with adult literature in the past, with adult fantasy, finding it to be too dense, finding it to be somewhat boring, then I think Stormlight Archive could easily it could easily go wrong for you. Definitely also these are like 1,000 page chunkers. I would definitely suggest you start a little bit lighter. So the main recommendation people have for you when you want to go into adult fantasy, and they're recommending Brandon Sanderson, would be Mistborn. So Mistborn Era 1, starting with the first book, The Final Empire, is indeed a great place to start. So the first book in this series, The Final Empire, starts out with a classic heist story. But it's a heist story that has got very big stakes, because we are following some people who, like a ragtag crew of people who basically have control over metals through their powers, who get together in order to overthrow the empire. Now, our main focus in this book is going to be on Vin. Vin is a young girl who has had a bad background. She's had a tormented youth. She grew up with only her brother to help support her, but her brother would often take out his frustrations on her, and so she was subjected to a lot of physical abuse when she was a young girl. And now at this point she's not even in a better situation, because she's in a crew with a bunch of thieves, and they basically just keep her around because she's lucky, and that they feel like whenever she's around things turn out their way. But then of course when things don't turn their way, they often also will take that out on Vin herself. So Vin gets recruited to this new crew, to the heist crew, because they realize the potential that she has. They recognize her for what she is, and she is a Mistborn. So she can control all metals. This is very much a coming-of-age story in which we are following Vin as she starts out as a sort of shy, sheltered girl who is afraid of trusting people, who is afraid of people harming her, of people abandoning her, and so we slowly see her step out into her own. There's also a romance in this book. It is not that central in The Final Empire, but it's definitely there. Warning there is that it's not, in the first book at least, this isn't the best developed relationship yet. But The Final Empire, I think, is a very good book for people looking to go into adult fantasy, because it has that focus on young female protagonists. It is also quite fast-paced. I do know that some people were bored at the beginning of The Final Empire. I definitely never was. I was always immediately intrigued about, like how they were going to try and solve this puzzle of how they were going to try and overthrow that empire. But I definitely do know that some people feel the beginning to be a little bit slow, but it has a huge payoff. I think Brandon Sanderson always has huge payoffs. His books they always feel like they're building up, and they definitely deliver at the end of the book. So The Final Empire would be my first recommendation for Brandon Sanderson, and then I will also give a second one because I just finished this book and I thought it was so good, and that is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, and this is actually a standalone at this point. So in that sense it's a very good place to start with Brandon Sanderson. So just like with The Final Empire, this focuses on young female protagonists. In this case we have 2. So we are following 2 sisters who are princesses of a realm. They are called Vivenna and Ciri, and Vivenna is the elder, and she has been trained all of her life to become the queen of a neighboring kingdom. She is supposed to be shipped off to marry the God King. So she has been training all of her life. However, right before she needs to be handed over to this kingdom, her father gets warning that basically it's a suicide mission to send her there. So he decides to send his other daughter, Siri. But so Siri, who has kind of been like the rebel of the family all of her life, she doesn't really take authority well, she doesn't really do what she's supposed to be doing, she's very much a free spirit, is all of a sudden shipped off to this neighboring kingdom to marry the God King, and she has no idea what she's in for. So we're following both of these girls, we're following multiple other characters as well. This is a very fast-paced book, more fast-paced, I'm pretty sure, than the Final Empire. It lags in certain places. For me, I found certain, I gravitated more towards the perspective of Siri than towards the perspective of Vivenna, especially in the beginning of the book. So the Vivenna parts dragged a little bit for me, but definitely more towards the ending. It has that big payoff feeling that I was talking about earlier, and so I definitely I definitely got engrossed in the entire story altogether, and Vivenna has a really good character arc as well. You know, I definitely thought her to be quite annoying at the beginning, but by the end I definitely did vibe with her a lot, and I definitely do think that she had the better character arc of the two actually by the ending. And so yeah, I do know that there is a sequel going to come out to this at some point. But it is at the moment still a standalone. I think it also started out as a standalone, that he just had a sort of like vague idea what could be happening in the future for this one, but he has at this point confirmed that at some point he will be writing a sequel for this one. But so don't go into it expecting to see that sequel anytime soon, because he definitely has a whole lot of books to write before he gets around to this sequel. Next up, probably the most adult book within the selection is Daughter of the Empire by Raymond T and Jenny Wood. So this is somewhat of an older publication. Let me actually see when this was published. So this was first published in 1987, so I wasn't even born yet when this was published, but I definitely read this when I was either a teenager or early 20s, and I enjoyed this a lot. But this is a lot more on the political side of fantasy. It's very light on the magic in this book. There's just, I think the only sort of magic that is present within this book is a certain element of different races and like the whole thing of an imagined setting. But apart from that, there's not really a lot of use of magic or anything like that. But we are following Mara. Mara is a young girl who has just lost her father and her brothers in a huge battle. So this kingdom is very much all centered around politics. They're all centered around house politics. So it's a little bit like Game of Thrones in that sense, because it's very much about furthering your house, the survival of your house. And since her father and brothers have just died in a major battle, I think, with one of their rival houses, her house is very much at risk. She is very much at risk of being the final sort of ruler of her house. So this whole series sees her trying to further her house, trying to survive as a clan, and throughout there's obviously a lot more that's getting involved, but it's very much centered around the sort of political play about the use of like espionage to know what the other houses are planning, trying to thwart their plans, trying to gain momentum by enforcing certain changes. And this is great. I really, really recommend it. I think Mara is a very interesting character. She is very much a woman in a man's world, but she's a woman in a man's world who is therefore also doing things that the other people in this world aren't even considering. You know, she's making choices that are they're innovative. You say it like that? And she's making innovating choices. She's making strange choices. She's making innovative She's making innovative choices. She's doing things unlike the way that other people in this world are doing it, and that can definitely have its payouts in this world. There's also a romance at the center of this, though I think the romance, it might only develop in the second book, or it's developing like more towards the end of this first one. I would definitely have to reread it because I really enjoyed this so much, and I am definitely down to reread them at some point. I actually do still have a relatively good memory of what happens in these books, but definitely recommend this if you are interested in this sort of like political game aspect of this book. Next up we have The Magician's Guild by Trudy Canavan. The Magician's Guild, learn to pronounce it. In The Magician's Guild we are following Sonia. Sonia is a young girl, she lives in the slums, and their sort of whole community is centered around this sort of rivalry between the poor people of the city and then the magicians, because the magicians are all high-class people. They're all people from the nobility. It's not allowed to be a magician, or it doesn't at least happen for a magician to exist within like the slums, within people who don't fall within the noble class. And so Sonia is part of these, you know, she's part of the lower class. She lives in these slums, but then one day at a demonstration she somehow manages to pass by the protective shield that the magicians have put up around them, and so it turns out that she actually has magical powers. The magicians kind of retaliate instinctively, which really pushes her away, and so in fear she runs away and she starts to go into hiding because she doesn't want the magicians to find her. So yes, another coming-of-age story featuring a young girl learning to step out into her own, basically. I really love this one. It also centers a lot about like the politics surrounding magicians. You know, you have the different factions of like the magicians who clearly have the best intentions, who want to serve the people, who want to make sure that the lower classes have as good of an opportunity as possible as well. Who want to make sure that, you know, lower class people have as good a life as possible as well. And then these other factions that are very much more looking towards their own gain, looking towards, you know, ways in which to keep that that elevated position for themselves. It also is interesting to look at, as I said in the beginning of this book, like only nobility is a part of like the magicians class, and so it's interesting to kind of see how opinions about that change throughout the series. As in the beginning, like everybody's so shocked at the idea that somebody from the lower class would be able to have magical powers, and that definitely challenges their views on like the potential and the merit of the lower classes. There is of course more happening in this story. There's more of a background of like danger coming from a certain element within this magic guilds. There's not a lot of focus on romance. Later on in the series there is a sort of development into romance. No, I liked it, though I definitely think that it came kind of not really out of the blue, but it definitely could have been way more fleshed out. This sort of evolution from like the earlier stage of this relationship to when they actually recognize that they are in love with each other, or that they even feel attracted to one another. So that is definitely something where there would have been room for improvements, but I definitely enjoyed this series a lot. For a long time it was one of my favorites. I definitely still very much like this series, I'm just a little bit more critical of that romance at this point. And then the final series that I'm going to be talking about, I won't be saying too much about because I forgot so much about the series already, so I'm definitely due for a reread, and that will be The Ballad of Sir Benfro by J.D. Osmoles. So this is a dragon book, and this is such an underrated series. I think it has like so little views, so little reads on Goodreads, but I really love this series. So this is a 5-part series, I think, in which we are basically following two perspectives. So we're following the perspective of Errol, who is a young boy who's kind of from yeah, he's from this sort of like small town within this setting. He has always dreamed of becoming part of the military, but for some reason or another he's still hesitant when they come around to recruit him, but he's sort of tricked into joining in the end, regardless. And the second perspective that we are following is the perspective of somebody born at exactly the same time that Errol was born, and that is this dragon Benfro. The dragon Benfro is basically more or less he's not the only dragon that's still there, but it's like the only dragon born in a very long time, because dragons have basically been hunted near to extinction, and so a lot of hopes for the dragon race are put into Benfro's hands. And so it's very much about these two characters growing up in a world that is basically out to get them, basically out to use them, abuse them, and you're kind of constantly just on the edge of your seat, hoping that they will one day meet each other and hopefully join up together and right the wrongs in this world. I definitely enjoyed this a lot, and as I said, I definitely want to reread this at some point because I've forgotten so much. There's definitely also this thing about like ley lines or something like that, which is sort of the magic within this world, and then you can travel from one place to the other if you learn how to walk the lines. But it's like very restrictive magic that basically dragons are very good at, but that humans haven't really mastered. And that is also being discussed within this book, that I remember. And it's also a talking dragon book. So just for your information, because I know that there are very different portrayals of dragons, so this is more of a humanized portrayal of a dragon, and so dragons definitely are the thinking, talking type of dragon in this one. I think this one is also quite clumsy. I think Benfro is quite a clumsy dragon as well, which is also quite an interesting view on a dragon for once. But I really enjoyed this a lot, and I definitely think, because it's also very much looking at coming of age, coming into your own, this definitely serves very well as a young adult as well. I do think it has its more darker sides, but I definitely also think that those darker sides fit in quite easily with YA. As I said, I don't have a great recollection at this point of everything that happened in this series, so I could be wrong. It could be stepping outside of the bounds of what is acceptable within YA, but I don't think so. I think it could easily be classified as a YA as well. So yeah, these are my recommendations for people who mainly read YA, who want to step into adult fantasy a little bit more. There are definitely a whole lot more. These are just the ones that I definitely think are the most accessible to people who are mainly focusing in on YA. Definitely let me know down below if you have some further recommendations. I can definitely think of some as well off of the top of my head, but I also didn't want to make this a too long video neither. And then yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books and if you agree with this assessment that these books could definitely serve a younger audience. But so yeah, see you guys for the next one. Bye!